Cool. Thank you, everyone. So, as mentioned, I'm Matt from Proof of Play, and I just wanted to show you guys a little bit about what we're using some of this amazing cryptography work that everyone in here is doing, kind of in our game. And so, come on. All right, cool. So, I'm a gamer, but also game engineer by trade. I've worked on some big games, some small games. Probably the biggest game is a game called League of Legends, if you've ever heard of that one. And small games, like this one that we're working on today. I work for a company called Proof of Play, and we make decentralized games, basically. And by virtue of that, making the infrastructure for these decentralized games as well, because it's cutting edge. I'll talk a little bit about the game that we work on here, but there's a little sneak peek with that little pirate there. So I'm not going to bore you too much with these slides, but the TLDR is random numbers make games a lot more fun. Now, there are games that you do not need random numbers to be fun, but random numbers definitely make some games really fun. So, as we can see here, small history, obviously, it doesn't have to apply to computer games, but, little tidbits about randomness has been in games forever. From Pac-Man, we had Clyde, who had a tiny little bit of randomness under the right conditions. And then if anyone played WoW and remembers Season 1 through 4 of Arena, they'll remember a particular weapon that a warrior had called Storm Herald, which procced way too many times to make that arena very fun at all. So we've seen it quite a bit. So a bit about the game we're building. We're building a fully on-chain RPG, or at least a fully decentralized RPG. We have about 500 smart contracts now. And we do things on and off chain, but always through decentralized consensus. It's natively composable. We have builders building on top of our game. And one of the dreams that we want to build in our game is, kind of throwback to the times where you saw games built on other games. Good examples of that is like my personal favorite games built on the Half-Life engine. If anyone remembers a obscure game called Natural Selection, that game was absolutely OP. But we've seen countless new genres come out of other games, and it seems like the remixability is what makes it super cool. So today I'm going to be talking about really how we take the random numbers that we get from drand and then turn them into things that are completely different and fun-bearing things. So we'll start with this one pirate here and one random number. And so the first thing I want to talk about is basically how we generate one random number for one player. So this is the custom VRF, which I think is pretty ubiquitous now. We built this 2 years ago-ish with drand, and I think everyone's kind of using a similar system. But to kind of show you guys how that powers things in the game, I can show you guys this little chest. Things like quests, RNG, anywhere in the game, opening a chest is probably our most used level of excitement. But if you were to open a chest that's deterministic, it's pretty boring. But if you can get that 1% drop rate item, you've got an amazing source of joy. So we've been using this for about 2 years, and one of the features that we used to come from other VRF providers, as I think you were talking about a little bit before, was speed. We were lucky to be pretty early adopters to the new fast nets of drand, and that gave us this average VRF response time. So we have a worst case scenario of 3 seconds, but on average, 1500 ms. That's a lot better than the 20 to 30 seconds that we were getting before. So as you can imagine, trying to wait to open a chest for 20 seconds is pretty painful. And then because of that speed, we've been able to use it quite a bit. So here's a little graph of basically our VRF calls in the game of Pirate Nation to show how many people are actually using these random numbers from drand that we generate. To put it in one thing, that's over 75 million random numbers. So that's pretty cool. And we're only going up now. As you saw that chart, it's starting to hockey stick. So super, super useful. So that's the first use case I think everyone's pretty aware of in this room. But now let's start thinking about some of the other ones. So now we've got a few more pirates. And so we want to have one random number for a few people. What kind of use cases can we think about for that? So this is a little bit about combat. It's a card-based battler, similar to, kind of inspired by Slay the Spire, if anyone remembers that style game. Little elements from, Marvel Snap, Magic the Gathering, that kind of like agency card game battler, but with a little bit of swashbuckling because, we're pirates, we're on the ocean. So what do we need random numbers for in a card-based game? So our big thing here is, let's take a look at the start of it. We need to shuffle our deck. You can't have the deck the same every time, or you'd have some pretty boring battles. So we actually use that to shuffle the deck in the game. And if we look at the graph here, we have a kind of like off-chain consensus layer that happens peer-to-peer. And the way that we are able to do our kind of like peer-to-peer consensus layer is basically by having everyone agree to get a future number. So I make a move, I signal a message around to all the people that I'm playing with and the people that are observing the game or arbitrating it, and we say, hey, I want to get this number. And then everyone agrees that that number hasn't been generated yet because they all have access to drand. And so because of that, we're able to make the move and commit and agree, and then the move is made, and then you're able to make that kind of shuffle happen. So interesting use case. It's a little bit less blockchain, but definitely more decentralized. So super cool. In the future on this, I've kind of got a couple of things here. Obviously, if we want to start playing with this more, we can look at centralization. And then, we've kind of been looking at ZK proofs and putting some stuff in there. But, for us, as I mentioned before, time is money. And it's expensive and it's slow. And so I think things like commit reveal and things like some of the stuff that drand are working on are things that are less popular in the blockchain space for gaming, but I think are definitely faster and have a lot of use cases that we haven't explored yet. So finally, let's talk about what if you want to have one number for everyone, basically. And so this is some of the monsters and stuff in our world. But what do? Well, we start with a number, and then we want everyone to have that number. But if anyone remembers No Man's Sky, you never really want to go full random. If you remember, there's a few quotes up here, but you can get to some worlds in No Man's Sky that are absolutely procedurally generated that are just not fun at all. So we tried to figure out a way to solve this problem. And as you can see here, we have these kind of chunks that we make. And these are chunks that are made by artists or made by contributors, made by people who kind of want to help build the world. And when you get a random number, we grab a mesh of all these chunks together. And we assign them in a deterministic way that every single game client that gets that number generates the exact same world. Why would we even want to do this for randomization? We'll see in a minute. The next thing we want to do is we want to layer in some more content on here. So in our world, we have, this is the white whale, and I know there are probably not too many game designers in the future, but there's in the audience, but there's a joke that game designers are always searching for the white whale. That's one of our monsters in here. We start layering those on as well with the same kind of seeding algorithm. And then finally, we expose the world so that everyone who has access to it can see each other in the world and see each other in play. So this is an example of one of the islands that were generated. This is obviously not something that's completely random. You can see that there is a volcano here. It's been done with art, but this is interfaced into that block system where people can see the different melding of random with human created. So why would we want it to be kind of like random in the first place? Well, if we just generated these worlds ahead of time and then we had this game, and I will say now that the worlds are generated every day, it would be a pretty boring game because people get used to kind of like immediately seeing in the future exactly what's going to be there. And one of the things we wanted to drive here is we wanted to have people collaborate to say like, oh, I want to go to this point on the map, or I want to go and figure out where these nodes are. And because we generate once a day and no one can know exactly what the world looks like ahead of time, that allows people to kind of collaborate on things like this. So this is a community generated map that's kind of in Google Sheets, and you can see it at the point in time. We screenshot this like yesterday. There was almost 100 people on it. And they're taking the map and like figuring out where everything is and putting it on there. And so now this drives content creation. People are trying to figure out, all right, how do I interface with that game? And this is all because we generated that one number that we started at that no one can figure out. So really, really good use here. And we're seeing way more builders build on top of our game on top of this. So because of this basic building block, people are starting to build applications on top of it. There's, someone's built like a racing game that happens on the map where as soon as it comes up, they can see how people race to get quickest to one part. And so that's another cool use case on the top. So finally, a bit about what's next. I'd love to, hear everyone's talk here and see how everyone's pushing forward the technology. I think for us, the things that we need as a game developer is figuring out ways to make it faster. 1500 milliseconds is really fast for a blockchain, but really slow for a game. And so figuring out how to get that gap down so that we can have different use cases that are more real time would be really useful. And then figuring out ways to get it more interrupt directly inside of a contract synchronously would be something that could help shave that time down as well. So that's just a little bit about kind of what we're doing. I tried to keep it brief so that we could catch up on time. But if anyone has any questions, or if you want to chat to me about how we're doing game dev on the chain and how we use these things, I'd love to chat after. Yes. That's one of the things we want to do. I think time lock, the big things that we want to unlock next are, right now the card game is open-handed, basically. So you see exactly what someone's going to do. Originally, we thought in game design that we wanted hidden information straight away. But when we started playing the game on tabletop with cards, we found that it was way more fun to telegraph your move because it's kind of like a flex to play like a really bad card. You're kind of like trolling the other player. But as we evolve, we want to start putting some of that stuff in. Yeah. Yep. So it depends on what the action is. So for VRF, we kind of have the worst case scenario of 3 seconds. So classic commit, you commit like, I'm going to get this random number, and then you get it. I'm sure you are very familiar with with this pattern based on what you're talking about. But the two other ones are a little bit esoteric. So the PvP combat mechanism, where people have consensus, the way that we do it is we say, hey, I want to get the number at this round. And because they have a real-time connection to each other, it's like between 20 to 50 milliseconds, they can all verify that the random number has not been generated yet. So they all check to see if it hasn't been generated yet, and they sign it into the action, and then the move happens. Now, this restricts greatly the actions that we can do. So right now, things like, it lends well to a card game. So for a card game, like doing a shuffle is really good. But say like doing a crit, it's probably a little too slow because you wouldn't want to play a card and then have to wait up to 3 seconds to see the damage that it did. So shuffles are okay, and you can kind of telegraph them a bit and hide them because you can do like, all right, cool, it's the end of the round, you're going to do a shuffle, you can throw an animation around it, you can have like, the ships move, things like that. So for that one, there's that. And then the last one is actually the easiest example of all. We set a specific time, like at midday every day, or UTC 0 every day. That's the time that we agree that everyone uses that as a seed for the world generation. Yep. Yeah, so this is one, if you want to have way more detail, I did a talk on this in Paris last year. But to give the very, very brief version, the game actions in the process of a game peer-to-peer with some observers. So observers who are motivated and rewarded to validate in real time. And that's basically people who are, everyone has the state, everyone is verifying each move, and everyone is signing that they verified each move, and they go up. That's purely for speed. And then at the end of a game, everything is uploaded to chain. And then those moves are then validated by other people who can go in, they can see that the game happened, and they can validate that those moves were correct as well based on the same game. Yes?
Do you do any content generation based off of random numbers? Like, oh, this is a random sword or a random whatever?
Yeah, absolutely.
And are they like NFTs? And then last question, have you considered portability across games? So like if I'm in here and I get some random sword, that somehow, because it's on chain, I can use it in some other game, Like it might not be the exact one-to-one, but it would be like, if I go from pirates to ninjas, it's a special sword in the ninja world too, based off of what's on chain.
Yeah, so addressing them kind of like first question through. So basically like do we use it to generate any items or things like that. There's kind of a few ways we do it. So there's like actions in the VRF which are pretty standard. So like if you're going to mint a pirate, like if you go to piratenation.game right now, you can go and mint a pirate. When you mint that pirate, we do a VRF and your stats are completely randomized based on that. It's also kind of ubiquitous throughout the game. So like any items you drop or like any RPG item that you would get is pretty much ubiquitous in there. In terms of like the world view, we have basically the seed map algorithm has basically selective nodes that the put in. So like in those on those kind of like chunks that you see, there'll be requirements for having a certain amount of spawn points. Like you'll a potential spawn point for an enemy, and then potential spawn points for nodes. And inside of the game, there's like a very vast mining system. There's 3 different types of resources you can mine, and you have skill levels that go up to get it, and rarities of the thing that you mine. And depending on how rare it is, you can get that. And because we can get this one number, we can validate it that way. So there's those, and then the final question of like cross game kind of items. I think the answer there is I would love to see that. I think that it's not something we're explicitly trying right now, but we're seeing it in the community. So, for example, the Gauntlet racing game that I mentioned before, or like people who are building add-ons on, that seems to be the way that happens right now. Instead of like a peer-to-peer, like studio-to-studio way, we're seeing more teams building on top of a game and then using the item as like a sub-game. We've tried a few experiments with different games. So there's a couple of other on-chain games that we've kind of traded items. So for example, there's a game called Overworld. In our game, you can get an Overworld Galleon. It's a 1 of 1. It's extremely rare. In their game, they have the same version of that, but they're not the exact same NFT. They're kind of different execution environments.
One last question.
Yeah, of course.
It's not randomness, but have you considered the implications of, say, like intellectual property, where you're minting an NFT in your game, probably has some graphics attached to it, but the fact that it's on chain gives it some degree of provable provenance, right? Have you maybe considered saying like, well, we would permissively license this to another game who wanted to reference it on chain, and as long as it was within our brand guidelines or whatever, it's almost like open source content.
Yep. Yeah. You can. So it's a deep hole there because we fortunately haven't seen anyone use it in like a content way that would be kind of like profane or something that we don't want these associated with. But right now you can go and use the assets at any time. We've completely open sourced them. You can go to our docs and you can download every single asset in the game. They're also all on IPFS. And so you can use them for whatever means you have. Again, we're kind of seeing some usage of it. The biggest usage I've seen is there's 2 games built on top of our game now with those. There's a tower defense game that is really interesting and using the same IP. And then someone's building kind of like attempting to build like a MOBA style game as well on top. And so we're seeing the beginnings of it. I think this is something that takes quite a lot of time to get to, but it's super exciting.
I don't want to filibuster.
No, this is great.
Is this a real-time MMO? I'm sorry, I wasn't here for most of your presentation.
Yeah, you're fine. I mean, I would encourage you to get on the game and check it out. But yes, the game is you can see other players in real time, and you can play card battle games in real time. And then the speed of the game is somewhat limited by the speed of the blockchain and drand for certain things. But both those we have pretty quickly, right? So our blockchain is running at 250 millisecond block times, and then drand itself, obviously we're seeing that average time of 1500 milliseconds. And then those are the main constraints, but parts of the game that need to be more real time, we do like that consensus. So for example, when you're exploring the world and seeing other players near you, you're directly connected to them. And those, we're seeing the ping times that you would see on that.
Got one last one.
Yeah, go for it.
I used to make video games, actually. I worked for a studio in Seattle. I was back in 2000. One of the questions that was asked at the Game Developers Conference, like in 2003 or something, that I thought was really great, which was, as a game developer, what's the one game you wish was being
Yep.
have one that's kind of a guilty pleasure that I will never make one, but I love them. Like, what's your game that you would love to see made that you're probably not going to ever work on?
So I think I could answer this a different answer like every time, like every day of the week. So I'll try and make the one that has just come to the top of my mind, which is I I really like the well crafted MMOs, like the super well crafted. And I don't think there's been like an amazing like crossover space one. So I mean, I would love to see like StarCraft 2 in space. Like that would be dope. Like that would be an amazing game. Yeah.
Sorry if I covered this also, but can you build incomplete information games on the DM that you're talking about, right? Like, can you always see the location of the other players in the end?
Yeah, good question. So, correct me if I'm misinterpreting you, but the question is, can you always see the other players inside of the game, right? Yeah. So, right now you can see the closest 40 people closest to you. So we kind of do a random matchmaking of people that are close to you. That'll change depending on guild affiliation, friends list, things like that.
And how do you hide the other players? Because like if it's all on the blockchain, you can't see it. Like, so is there any?
So on the blockchain, you can see everything everyone else is doing using a block explorer, but the seeing other players thing is all peer to peer. So it's decentralized, but it's not on chain. So with that, it's just about like you can subscribe to anyone, kind of like multicast, and then you basically just pick the first N that are closest to you.
So you can't build games like poker, right? Where you need to like hide information about other players' cards.
Yeah, at the moment, the technology is very much like open to everyone. So every move is forecast. And those are the things I would love to see in the future, though. Hidden information is probably the hardest problem.
And is that the latency, right? Like, how many people can you have in a game, and like for it to be still there, will
Yeah, so that's going to depend on which feature of the game you're playing. But we've got some good benches for that so far. So in terms of just the general game, like how many players can we have on one chain per day, we topped out an Arbitrum Orbit chain at about 100,000 DAU. So we run two now, and we have some primitives that transfer messages between the both. But like if you look at rollup.wtf, you'll see our two chains near the top of that. So that's kind of like the maximum for the current, and that's roughly 70 million gas per second. I'm eagerly watching every kind of chain developer right now, seeing if they can pump more gas per second into it. And it seems like some chains are getting to gigagas level, which would be really interesting to up that. In terms of like the other features we saw, like for a shared world, seeing other players, things like that, those are really boundless because they're peer to peer. We can kind of at least orchestrate and have a small orchestration layer where you can connect to a node and like basically like kind of horizontally scale it that way. And then the PvP is like it's 1v1. So getting a small group and consensus group is pretty simple. Yeah, no worries. All right. Thank you, everyone.